Hello, everyone. The episode I want to talk about to tackle today's subjects in class are the season 3 premiere episode Nosedive. For a quick summary, our main character's name is Lacey Pound. She's on a social media app that determines how people are in society on a scale from 1 to 5 based on how they treat others and their outward appearance in public. This system determines everything from how people perceive others to certain benefits to places people are allowed to live in. Lacey starts at a 4.2 rating. Seeing a 5 out of 5 ranking boosts her happiness and how she feels, but she sees a 4 out of 5 rating from her childhood friend and or bully named Naomi. It causes her to scroll her page nonstop, eventually making a caption to get her attention. They get on a call and she is invited to her wedding to be the maid of honor and puts on a fake persona to others to get a more favorable ranking in some apartment she's looking at. She offers food to people in an elevator, is polite to those at tables for food and more. She sits with professionals to gauge her popularity growth. Lacey leaves for the wedding, but before this has an argument with her brother Ryan, who holds a rating in the threes. Ryan sees through this disguise and calls her out on it, missing the person Lacey was before this took a toll on her life and how he can't even have a normal conversation with her anymore. However, Lacey's in way too deep in this facade and gets into a fight with him before leaving. Ryan gives her a bad score on the way out due to this interaction. In this quest for popularity, she goes on a downward spiral, losing rating rapidly, as she is unable to find a flight due to her being a 4.1 rating now and not a 4.2. She caused a scene and her rating drops exponentially at the airport she tries to get to the wedding. She has to take a rental car that is so outdated that there's no charging cables for it. Her rating goes down simply by people driving past her as she's on the side of the road looking for a ride. Um, The entire wedding invite itself was set up using a simulation by Naomi to see if she would fit for the wedding due to her ranking. Lacey shows up to the wedding after several moments of hijinks. Covered in mud trying to deliver her speech, she eventually reaches a boiling point. Her rating drops far below 1 and even threatens the groom with a knife before being escorted out of the wedding, yelling and in tears. This episode ends with her in prison, letting go of the fake persona and finding true joy in letting out her real personality as she goes back and forth with another. I think this episode has a lot to do with the Scott theory that we've learned in class. The reason I think this is because of how people are using this app in this episode and are seen differently and used different ways based on their status. For the high ranking and elite, it's a way to keep societal power and standing and can keep that power and hold it over others. For the poor, it's suppressive and cruel and creates an issue in terms of doing anything for society. Scott theory implies that different groups of people can all look at the same technology differently. Bishker's work goes into this theory as he analyzed the early creation of a bicycle and how some want it for speed and others want it for to have safer measures. Bishker ultimately determined that the safety of the bicycle was the ultimate outcome based on what society wanted. The first scene I wanted to use as reference was early on in the episode when Lacey goes to a coffee shop uh, to a worker with a rating in the threes. The man offers her a discount, not because of the person she is, not because of anything she did differently to treat her, but because she had a high ranking. This scene goes to show that elites, or those with a high ranking, control society and how it works while others are fighting to stay afloat. How people in power influence technology and how it impacts the world around them. It also determines that status equals self-worth. The higher you are in status, the better you are perceived and the more advantages you tend to have over others. There are those in the elite tier seemingly, based on the context used within the episode itself, that a 4.5 is basically the elite status. It seems that they have more power and influence over others. The power shapes the system, and the technology plays an important role in shaping society. Another scene I want to use is when Lacey is picked up by a truck driver, an old trucker named Susan. Lacey is skeptical to go on the truck at first, not because of how she looks or how she was treated by Susan, but because Susan had a very low ranking. Uh, Susan seems to be the opposite of Lacey, someone who's unbothered by the ranking system. She sees what she used to be in Lacey, someone who was obsessed with the rankings and nothing else. But after her husband lost a hospital bed to someone who was a tenth of a ranking higher, she lost and decided not to care anymore. She said what she wanted and acted how she wanted. This contrasts with Lacey, who sees the app as a way to gain standing and not as a way to lose it all. That the arbitrary number can determine life or death in society, how far it has gone, and how damaging it can be to others. This shows how different groups of people with the same technology see it differently. When Lacey sees it as a social hierarchy and a way to gain power, Susan sees it as something that devalues the human life and fake interactions and relationships. Furthermore, it shows how society and Susan have an extremely different view of the same technology benefiting the elites. The last scene I want to touch on is the wedding scene at the end of the episode. In this scene, Lacey crashes Naomi's weddings even after being explicitly told not to come due to her social standing. Lacey sees this wedding as a way to get a ton of good ratings from a bunch of highly ranking and respected people based on the app and wants to give a speech done by any means necessary. She's covered in mud and looks flat out terrible and starts to deliver a speech where the audience and Naomi seem less than amused. Her speech ultimately devolves into anger and irritation about Naomi and starts to lose the facade that she has put on throughout the entire episode. They try to escort her out, but she threatens them with a knife as she direly wants to finish the speech. Her ratings drop more and more as she finishes and is escorted out. The wedding's attendees were all set up based on their rankings, and Lacey was originally invited to the event due to them running entire simulations if she would be a good candidate, not because of her relationship with Lacey. How Naomi used technology in ways to keep and manage her status. Lacey sought to gain status and gain popularity amongst the elite. This also shows how power dynamics can heavily influence technology's purpose and perception. There was a power tool for the elite, and there was something calculated to invite her to the wedding and not out of the kindness of her heart. Nosedive is a very interesting episode to me because it touches on themes that seem alarmingly close to reality, even if the story is in a fictional world. While technology in this episode is based on constant peer feedback may seem exaggerated, it serves to mirror social dynamics already existing in stuff like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc., any social media app used, Snapchat, where public image and quantifiable approval often outweigh honesty and being real. The episode asks a question to society. What would happen if the obsession with social validation became something far worse? This is where I think the Scott theory becomes incredibly relevant. Scott suggests that technology does not evolve through its own logic, but rather through interpretation through different societal groups. In Nosedive, we see clear evidence of this in how characters understand and interact with the rating system. Some people, like Lacey, view the app as a tool for upward mobility and a way to achieve social and economic success through carefully crafted appearances and strategic interactions. For her, technology represents opportunity, something to grow up, but others, such as the truck driver Susan, see the same form system as a way to control, to exclude others, to lose out on benefits and lose lives. It's a life or death situation. This divergence of perspective illustrates flexibility, which is a very core concept in Scott, in which the same technology takes on different meanings depending on who's using it and what experiences they have. Moreover, the episode demonstrates how powerful societal groups, particularly the elites, shape not only how the app functions, but how it's perceived across society. Those in the top percentile ratings receive tangible rewards, priority access to housing, customer service, jobs, etc. These privileges aren't necessarily based on character or skill or what somebody does, but rather how perform, they do their tasks outwardly into the public and not what they do behind the scenes. Um, that concept, whereas like a particular interpretation of technology in this case is a legit measure becomes accepted as natural or unchangeable, which is something that is said in the Scott theory. Alternatives or criticisms are pushed to the margin, and people who have a low rating are outcasted by society. What's definitely disturbing is like the level of fakeness and emotional labor people perform just to maintain or increase their score. Everyone's smiles like feel unreal. Compliments are like forced to gain up another star. People aren't kind because they want to be kind. People aren't good because they want to be good. They want it so they can be rated highly. The episode reveals a world in which human relationships have been commodified, where one's entire identity is reduced to a number and every action is calculated and judged in public that can determine somebody's social standing and everything about their life. This creates constant fear and anxiety and depression about losing a job. Lacey, for example, practices her tone of voice, facial expressions, and online posts to seem more likable, even when she's feeling desperate or angry inside. Her collapse At the end, her nosedive, if you will, both emotional and social, illustrate what happens when a person's sense of self becomes too entangled by how others view them. Ultimately, Nosedive serves as a tale about the social construction of technology and the dangers of letting a single interpretation of tech, especially one that was driven by status, conformity, etc., dominate societal life. It encourages viewers to think critically about how current social media platforms shape our behavior and how those platforms are influenced by the values of the people who design and use them. It also raises important questions about authenticity, power, and resistance. What happens to those that refuse to conform? Are they outcasted by society entirely, or are they still let in despite all their faults and all their differences? This is why I think Nosedive is a really good example of the Scott theory and how it reacts to the rest of the episode. Everything is based on it, and everything is how a society is shaped is based on those ideals. Thank you for watching.